a few weeks ago, we looked at the drive towards the professionalization of innovation. And that was a conversation we had led by Magnus Carlsen, who has been driving that agenda from Sweden. Today, what we're going to do is hear about some of the recent research that's been done into the challenges that a move from occupational professionalization can bring, including some of the hurdles that innovation potentially is going to need to overcome to be taken seriously as an industry. So the conversation today, I'm delighted to say, is going to be led by Peter Robbins, who has very recently published a research paper exploring this. A lot of you will know Peter. He operates out of DCU, but you might not know that he was Global Head of Innovation Excellence for GlaxoSmithKline for many years, where he led many of the worldwide product launches for things like Lucasade, Aquafresh, Sensodyne, Panadol, Bina, just to name a few. So Peter's PhD is in innovation, and his research now primarily focuses on how firms organize for innovation. He's an innovation advisor to governments, development agencies, and is also on a number of innovation advisory boards in business and the third sector. He's also, I'm very happy to say, part of the Innovate Island community and a regular attendee and contributor to these Friday sessions. So Peter, I think that's enough from me. So if it's okay with you, I shall hand over to you now.
Thanks, Charlie. Although I think when people are building me up, I really feel they never quite say enough. But, you know, I'm happy enough to run with that. So, yeah, I'm really pleased to be decanting this research with this group. So anyway, let's the question, I suppose, is innovation management an emerging profession in the corporate world? So let me start by saying that in everyday speech, to be a professional requires only that you be paid for your work. But sociologists and researchers understand professionalism differently. For them, professionals are a member of a limited group of high status service occupations, such as medicine, engineering, and law, but importantly, that their expertise rests on some branch of specialized knowledge. And most of the writers on professions attempt to describe some characteristics of professions that make them substantially, significantly different from occupations. Now, for me, this research has a personal element. I know pretty much all of the names on this call, but I was a former director of innovation excellence in GSK, which at that time was Europe's biggest company and the world's third biggest pharmaceutical company. When I was finished with them, they were only the 11th biggest, so you can see what a good innovator I was. But I'd been working for them in Ireland and in Denmark and then in the HQ in London. And when they asked me to take a role in the US, I decided to manage my exit from the organization, and I came home to Dublin thinking that I was in possession of very valuable skills from which I could forge a lucrative consulting career. But it was 2010 and Ireland was in the grip of a recession. I went to meet a school friend who had been promoted, I have in brackets here in my notes, far beyond the capabilities he had shown when we were at school together. But he was head of retail and strategy in Bank of Ireland, and he was so important at the time that somebody met me in the ground floor and brought me up to the third floor, and someone else met me in the third floor and brought me further up. And he paternalistically, he took me over to the window of his very capacious office, and he said, look at all these eerily still cranes, and look at all these deserted building sites. He said, we don't need more innovation, we need less. This is the dividend of too much innovation, he said. So I found that the appetite for innovation was somewhat circumscribed. And I met with people in Enterprise Ireland. I even got to see the Minister, Conor Lenihan, even up to the Taoiseach, then Mary Coughlin. But I was extremely alarmed at the time, and I feel most of the people on this call, or many of them, were around doing similar things at the same time. I was extremely alarmed at the lack of interest, the lack of vision, the primacy of rhetoric over investment. And I set up a small agency in Nova UCD called the Innovation Foundation and tried to begin looking for consulting opportunities. But one thing that I found was that I was merely one of a growing number of mid-career innovation specialists who had come from blue chip R&D-led global organizations. Some were from Intel, some were from Vodafone, some were from Procter & Gamble. And it seemed to be perceived that the skills we'd learned were not so obviously transferable. And I began to get interested. Sorry, the slide is this idea of, if innovation management is a profession, then it does rest on some branch of specific specialized knowledge. But the other thing that intrigued me, and which I can't really speak, but it'd be interesting to talk a little bit about in the Q&A, is there is definitely a phenomenon in innovation management, and I'm going to come around to this, which shows that if you're leading innovation in an organization, you are generally in charge of the pipeline for the company and its biggest project. So its future success rests on the quality of the work you do. And generally, the smartest people are working with you. And yet, when it comes to big roles in the executive suite in organizations, very often the innovation people are overlooked in favor of people who've had P&L responsibility for Germany or for a brand or for, a region or something like that. And that, I think, is worth noting it. So that's, as I say, if you're working in innovation, you're generally working on the most important projects, and you're working with the top talent of the organization. So it's kind of important. The other thing is, why is everybody looking to be a profession rather than just be an occupation or a role? I mean, the first thing is, of course, it means that there are some barriers to entry. There's some closure. The other thing is the prestige, or there's prestige to being in a profession, to be one of the professions, and the credentialism gives people an identity, a professional identity, a home, if you like. Obviously, if you're reading this, as I have done, the sort of sociology of the professions, at one time there were floods of doctors and lawyers, etc., coming in, and one of the things was they needed to close off entry routes to these things. That's why they're called collegial professions, because they're controlled by colleagues. Part of it is an attempt to restrict the number of people who are practicing to protect the income. Then there's another bit about becoming a profession, which essentially means that obviously that develops, and I think something like Innovation Island is doing these latter two things, is helping look at quality and look at practice and put in place templates and benchmarks and help organizations and individuals, professionals and practitioners, to be able to benchmark the quality of the service they're delivering. And that then develops a more formalized competence and skills that helps organizations build their capability. Now, the one thing is, almost every occupation embarks on the heroic journey from the occupation to a profession. And if you have a look at the literature, you can find cases being made for librarians, for sex workers, for public relations people, for photographers, for journalists, for translators, for chemistry teachers, for care workers, for politicians, for trapeze artists, for dancers, for equestrian riders, and for chiropodists, to name a few. So everybody embarks on this heroic journey, but not everybody reaches the destination. And generally in the corporate world, it begins with an occupation. If you imagine somebody who had come into computing in the 90s or something like that, then they become, or into quality or something, they become an expert, and then it becomes a profession. And the literature distinguishes two types of profession. There is the collegial profession, which were the original professions of the clergy, medicine, law, accounting, then latterly engineering and architecture. But then there are, and where people's first loyalty is to the profession. So somebody, a surgeon in the Beacon, their first loyalty and duty is to medicine and to the patient. There's a level of sort of altruism or social good involved. But then there's the rise of the corporation and corporate professions, things that are, as businesses evolve and develop, scale, they need certain skills and these become professions. But generally one would be, one's first loyalty is to the company. And there's an ownership thing about collegial professions. They're generally practices and legal partnerships and accounting partnerships. They're owned and controlled by the practitioners. People who work for large corporations don't own and control the corporation, and their first loyalty is generally to that practitioner. So if you were like the head of comms for for Meta, or if you were product designer for Apple, your credential would be more associated with the company than with the profession. Anyway, part of the research was there's a lot of this called sort of trait theory. What are the characteristics of the traits that distinguish an occupation from a profession? On the left-hand side, we've got those professions that emerge from the rise of corporations following right from the Industrial Revolution, but to more recently, the emergence in corporate professions of marketing, even digital marketing, HR, IT, project management, even business consulting. The first thing is there must be some theoretical basis for the knowledge. There has to be a body of knowledge that is consistently being refreshed and renewed, that provides people with a theory so that when they look at cases, it's not just a simple mechanical 4-box matrix. There's some level of theory. The second thing is there must be courses, the provision of education and training that's specialist for that area. So that makes innovation management different from air traffic control or something like that. A third hallmark of profession is that there are associations like this one. And that's why I'm so pleased to be talking today at Innovation Island, because it is a hallmark of an emerging profession, that there's the emergence of professional associations. At some point, they actually license practice, and Magnus from Sweden in the RISE Association, they're beginning to sort of certify practice, and they're using the ISO 56002 as the basis of a curriculum, and they're developing innovation certificates, and those are acting as maybe categorizations for hiring of candidates, etc. And then the final thing is people need to want the service. There's got to be some level of demand. When you move to a collegiate profession, law or medicine, there's a code of ethics. There's the bar council, the medical council. If you fall below a certain standard, then obviously you're disbarred or your practices. We don't have that in the corporate side, and I think maybe someone will ask me a question about that at the end. In the collegiate profession also, there is that sanction of suspension or people being disbarred, etc. The other thing that's different for the collegiate professions is there is supposedly, there's basically free legal aid. There's people who have a sense of calling or vocation to do the work that they do. Their competency is regularly tested, so there's continuing professional development. And usually a professional association is the guardian at the gate that allows people to enter the profession or not. So looking at those tests of a profession, the first one is there prolonged and specialized education and high-level qualifications available in that specialism? The second is there really theoretical knowledge, and is there a base of peer-reviewed, high-level 4-star academic papers being generated where the body of knowledge is being refreshed? Then are there professional associations, and what's the evidence that there is a sustained demand for the service? So in the middle column, then we've got what do we need to find out to show that these tests have been proven? So if you take the column on the left are hurdles to qualify as an emerging profession, then the middle column is what's the evidence we need to find? Has there been an increase in university programs? Have these postgraduate and qualifications been growing? On the theoretical knowledge, in the sort of 4-star FT50 journals, have there been a considerable increase in the number of research articles been published? And then can we show that around the world there have been a growth in the number of professional development associations? Then the bit that was kind of hardest, one of the bits that was hardest to evidence, was the number of senior roles in innovation management growing. But any of you who have a subscription or an alert with Indeed or any of those things will know that that is the case. But I'll show you the evidence that we were able to produce. So then, so the first bit, we go to the AACSB, which is the blue ribbon of business schools, looking at their 17,000 business school programs and looking at the titles of master's qualifications, etc., and then looking at the Economist Executive Education Database. For our theoretical knowledge, we're looking at the FT50 journals, and then we've done a sort of a search around the world for professional associations. So let's have a look at the first one. There has been a phenomenal rise in the number of specialist degrees. Somebody's got a mobile phone on or something like that. I don't know. Are you guys getting a bit of feedback there, Charlie? No. Oh, okay, great.
And no, nothing, no.
You can hear me okay?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Great. Thank you. So anyway, we can see over dipping into this data set 3 times over the last 20 years. The title of the paper was originally The Coming of Age of Innovation Management, because it was like 21 years since, in the same article, in the same journal, the Journal of Product Innovation Management, which is the top journal in the innovation management specialism, 21 years before, they'd written an article about the professionalization of innovation management. So in a number of these things where it's been possible, we've gone back the 21 years to see what's happened. But you can see that the major emphasis of degrees is just skyrocketing. Innovation management is a major emphasis of people really specializing in this. The second thing to mention there is, in order to provide specialist degrees, you need a sort of a codifiable, teachable body of knowledge. And the ISO 56002 and that whole suite, in a way, became the first firm evidence that actually there is an acknowledged set of things people need to know to practice this as a profession. And most of these degree programs will have that at the core, or some element of the those programs. The next thing is, have people been writing more about this? So this is the Journal of Product Innovation Management. It's a 4-star journal with a rejection rate of about 97%. Technovation, Technological Forecasting and Social Change, R&D Management, all these journals that focus on innovation, but they would often be looking at technological innovation or open innovation. But the question around innovation management, have they been looking at that and building the world's knowledge and building the world's knowledge about that topic? It's clear that they have, looking back over those 21 years. And these are the FT50 journals, which are the most important management journals in the world. So that case is now proven as well. And then this one, I just sort of popped it in, but in the article, which the team were good enough to circulate, you can just scroll down and have a look. But, there have been professional organizations since the 1930s looking at this, and almost every country has developed its own innovation group. And I suppose part of the nice thing about Innovation Island is that it's, little by little connecting with more and more of these groups and sharing best practice and insights about practice and stuff like that. But obviously the Swedish connection has been a strong one and a very useful one, because they're definitely ahead of the curve on the provision of specialist qualifications through a professional organization body. But as you can see, in the latter years, there's been an acceleration in the number of these, and in the earlier years, it took quite some time before the first few became established. Our final test, so that they're the tests of provision of higher levels of education, that it rests on some branch of theoretical knowledge, and that branch of theoretical knowledge is well established and growing. And the third is, are there a number of professional associations growing around the world to help shepherd through this emerging profession? And the final one was, is there a sustained demand for this? And then, one of my former students is a good role in LinkedIn and was able to look. LinkedIn don't keep historical data, and neither, well, Indeed keep a little bit more, but they only can give a snapshot at the time. And this time was April 22, which was as we were emerging from COVID, but not when we had emerged. So there wasn't a sort of a COVID uptake. There was, it was in the I think the economy was still depressed with COVID. So anyway, we could see that it was a fast-growing, a high number of jobs, and quite interesting that the companies that were recruiting seemed to be recruiting at the top end. So in a way, they were recruiting for chief innovation officers or heads of innovation, which seemed to show positive things in that they were building the innovation architecture from the top. So in that case, so these are just to summarize the collegiate professions. They are the qualifications required for the corporate professions, and those have been these guys. And so our question then is, with the rise of the corporation, has the case been proven? And it has been. The question is, are we following in the footsteps of human resources, where it's likely that if you go to an interview or meet a HR person, their primary or secondary degree will be in human resources. Similarly with IT, and maybe increasingly with project management. So these were our tests, and the answer is that innovation management has passed all of the major hurdles. So is innovation management going in the same direction? It definitely is. So then the paper finishes with a number of consequences of that, I suppose. What are the implications of that research? Part of it is that if it's acknowledged that that innovation has become professionalized, then I think there becomes a much clearer role templates around innovation about what's expected from the function and how it interacts with other functions in an organization. The second thing is that if role templates are established and the actual work is established, then benchmarks about quality and performance can be established and can be shared among organizations. Clearly, the innovation management begins to have a louder voice and more influence in the company, and clearer career pathways begin to emerge. From the researcher's point of view, it's great anytime you're researching innovation, because it's a kind of a slippery concept or an umbrella construct. There is always definitional drift around some of the concepts. So it'll be great for researchers to have verifiably competent people in organizations who are in charge of the function of innovation. So, Charlie, I am going to pause there and open up for a discussion.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter. That was really interesting summary. I have read the report, but that's kind of brought it to life and filled in a few gaps for me, which is really useful. So I have a number of questions, but Owen has his hand up. Please, anyone, if you want to put your hands up, if there's a question you want to ask or a point you want to make, and I will hopefully come back to one of mine if I get time at the end. Owen, you had your hand up first, so I'll come to you first. And you're on mute.
Thanks, Peter. Obviously, I have to press the button 3 times. It doesn't work the first 2. So the first one was the slides. So the presentation was brilliant. Thank you very much. The slides are not on anymore. Peter, do you need the slides for later on? Are you happy that we do the chat without the slides?
Yeah.
That's fine.
I can give you all the slides. Don't worry.
The slides are off anyway.
That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second question is really to go back to the first one up on chat was Ron. So he's putting to Peter and to Charlie and myself and others who are involved in this work of professionalizing, standardizing, so on. What about the contradiction? Ron, do you want to kind of bring that question up, flesh it out a bit for Peter? The quality of the line for Ron might be a little bit of a challenge, Peter. So the contradiction.
Okay, well, I can get the question on, and I have to say that it's a reservation that I would have shared, instinctively, viscerally. I really share that thing. If innovation gives companies competitive advantage by having some alchemy of creativity that is able to find a little bit of blue ocean of competitive advantage, then if you formalize it, does that take the pixie dust away? And so there is an element in which I think that is true, but by maybe spending some more time with you guys and with the NSAI thing, my overarching feeling is that that innovation is so important for organizations to create a sustainable future, and so few of them have the bandwidth and the tools and frameworks and competence to do it, the know-how, that having a professional body of knowledge is hugely advantageous for the vast majority of companies that make up the backbone of our economy. I'm not expecting that Flexo and Procter & Gamble will be, reaching for the ISO 56002 and revising their thing, but I do think it's very helpful for everybody to have a how-to guide that's clearly well thought out and bears the imprint of a lot of experience and expertise. If that's what he was going to ask, sounds like it was.
Oh,
hi, Ron.
Yeah, sorry, my internet is a little bit up and down, but when everybody tries to do this, there is the contradiction, and I'm not explaining it very well, but I don't think it's about the pixie dust. It's that innovation by its nature is innovative, and I think formalization is the enemy of innovation.
That's why you've written so many books on it, Ron, is it?
Okay, you know what? But you understand what I mean.
Yeah.
Can I come in? Because I put in the chat there. In my view, from my experience, there's a precedent in terms of this in the software development arena. When we put quality management systems in for our software development that made sure that we looked at risks, issues, timescales, resources, cost, budgets, all of these things, testing, design, best practice. At no point in those standards did it tell us what language we should be using, what architecture we should be using, how we should go about designing, what we should be producing. It didn't constrain any of that. It basically got to the point where if you're going to do software development, then make sure you think of all this stuff. And wrap it around the creative bit. And for me, and it is just my opinion, that's what the ISO is doing for innovation. It's not saying use design thinking, use creativity, use collaborative tools. It's not saying any of that. It's saying if you're going to generate ideas, make sure you know what problem you're trying to solve. Make sure you validate that. Make sure you validate the ideas before you spend money commercializing them, and keep an eye on your risks, resources, issues, benefits, all that kind of other stuff as well. So it's a frequent point of view that comes forward, and it's so, as you can tell, it's something I've kind of reeled off a few times, but be interested to hear what anybody else thinks, if that's experience. Saw a few nodding heads there.
Anyway, it's good to see you, Ron, with the backdrop of palm trees and blue sky.
I know, it's awesome.
Anyway,
Ron,
sorry,
does that address that at all for you?
Oh no, I can argue, because if you read up on mastery, once you have achieved mastery, you get another step into the innovation. But my problem is that a lot of innovation is so ineffective that maybe we're not applying the right techniques, and we keep on getting the same solutions to the same problems, and we're not out innovating, particularly when you start talking about climate change and others. So I think there's something wrong with innovation, and I don't think formalizing is going to help that.
So can I come back to one of my questions before going to Alan and Christian? And then, because one of my questions I had was, is the education in this area good enough? You've looked at, there's a lot of courses with innovation in their title, with innovation modules. A few of us, we went down to Maynooth and spoke to the innovation students there and basically asked them if they wanted to work in innovation in some place. I think there were 35 people in the room. One person put their hand up and said yes. The rest said, no, it's too complicated, it's too difficult. So we kind of fell off our chairs, then looked at what they're doing and said, what the hell is anybody teaching you? To tell you that it's so complicated, you shouldn't be looking to do this as a career. So were there any findings, Peter, in your report that sort of said that the education that we've got at the moment in this space is adequate, or is there a lot of room for improvement there?
Well, I'd say there's a lot of room for improvement. I feel that there'll be a lot of overlap in all of the courses, but none of them will be similar, and they'll all have shortcomings in some area. But I suppose for us, for me, the question was more about giving some the respectability or somehow annexing off, saying that innovation is a specialist field and it has maybe however one wishes to teach it. In the larger organizations, you can see my co-author is the very eminent Gina O'Connor, and she's done an awful lot of work on beyond the champion and how in so many organizations innovation is a kind of a volunteering thing, and it's seen as a project. It's done by a group of volunteers, somebody's anointed ahead of it, and then if they do happen to find a bit of low-hanging fruit, then more by serendipity and spontaneity they're given a role and stuff like that. So she's been saying for ages, there are 3 phases of this, and we need people in the discovery phase who are, looking for blue ocean stuff and different business models. We need people in the incubation phase, and we need people in the delivery phase. So I'm not saying that my work is not about saying how can we solve all the problems of innovation. It's really about saying, is this a legitimate profession, or is it a kind of a hobby?
Yeah.
People who are curious and have a restless spirit and stuff like that. So I was pleased to say that, yes, we can say definitively against the traits and characteristics that are held up as benchmarks and evidence of other professions, innovation management qualifies and meets the hurdles. But I'm kind of interested in, lots of the people we meet in our circle are people who have exited large organizations and decided to work on companies rather than in companies, helping them with innovation. When I see some of our friendly faces around here, and we've all had lots of chats about that. That's another piece I'd love to research around what happens to innovation people afterwards. We did for some of the big innovation conferences in the US, myself, when they were during COVID, we ran a few sessions around that. Generally, if they meet a hard stop in their own organization, they go and do the same thing for a different organization. But there's no clear, the selection of those people is difficult because the only thing people go for is experience. Have you done the same thing? Like, it's so binary. Have you done exactly the same thing in a comparable organization like ours? Other than that, we're not going to give you the job. I think at least we're widening the aperture to say, if you've got these qualifications, there's a selection aperture. So anyways, sorry, okay. Charlie. Now I can't remember what you asked me.
That's okay. That's okay. With a couple. Thanks for that. We've got Alan. I think you had your hand up just seconds before Krishnan, so we'll come to you first, and then Krishnan.
Yeah, sure. Enjoyed that. It was very interesting. I enjoyed the presentation, but I think I'm going to go back and have a look at the study because it does tap into a lot of things. I'll have to get a copy from my wife, who is a really well qualified lawyer, much better qualified in terms of formal qualifications than I am, for sure, and who gets a kind of an automatic twitch every time she hears someone on the radio talking about professional footballer or a professional hairdresser. There is still that kind of, the collegial, the prescribed professions, and that's what I'm going to ask you. Just in terms of that, medical malpractice, or lawyers running off with their clients' funds and things, and there's a kind of a sanction, there's a code of conduct that they have to adhere to that's managed by a professional body. I always kind of find it interesting to think what that might look like in terms of an innovation professional body that would, you'd be defrocked if you were caught doing X, Y, and Z. And it does sound like a little bit of a left field one, but there's an analogy with a guy called Mike Montero, who I've recommended to lots of people on this call and lots of other people as well, who's a UX designer who used to work for a lot of the kind of big Silicon Valley startups. And he has this thesis that, these dark patterns and these kind of sneaky UX tricks that get people hooked on dopamine from scrolling and things have had huge negative social consequences, and has this whole thesis worked out in 2 excellent books, at least. I know somebody who has seen him and says he's delightfully angry and passionate about this, and saying that, what if you had to do the design equivalent of a Hippocratic oath? First, do no harm. Your software is not going to mess with people's minds. You know, it's not going to have all these unseen consequences that maybe you as a designer should have foreseen. Maybe your CEO, your founder mightn't have seen them coming down the track. But if you're literally there at the coal face, designing things that are going to get their hooks into people's brains, maybe you should think about it. And I kind of wonder what would be the equivalent for innovation. For me, partly it's, you know, as you'll know, I'm kind of into the whole sustainability thing. And when innovation starts coming up with single-use stuff and built-in obsolescence and you know, disposable razors and all these kind of things, you know, that's probably a thing that should have been looked at now that we know what we know about where things are going in terms of environmental issues. You know, is there anything else in terms of innovation that there should be a red line around that maybe an industry body would give you a slap on the wrist for getting involved in? It's probably not one that you've come across before, so I'm not expecting that you have a really well worked out slide or bullet points for it, but just is that a question worth pondering maybe as the industry moves towards professionalization or professionalism?
Well, actually, Ellen, I think that's a super next step on the agenda of professionalism. When I was thinking about this, one of the things that separates a corporate profession from a collegial is this code of practice. And I was talking to various people around, should we say, so I do remember you talking about Mike Montero before, and but should we say, for instance, if you worked in innovation for a tobacco company or a gambling company or whatever it would be, that you would be disbarred or not allowed. But then, of course, my colleague pointed out that they all have lawyers working for them, and they're not disbarred. They're, you know, but I do think what you say around a level of conscious, responsible, sustainable innovation has to become part of the stuff. The people who invented the single-use vapes now that are all on every the gutter or, you know, lining every street, all of those things you describe, I think we need to have a much more conscious approach to it. There is some stuff in the literature around what would happen for a code of ethics and innovation. And I also looked at codes of ethics for the American Marketing Society and for the Project Management Institute, but they are so vanilla, you wouldn't believe it. It's all about inclusion and diversity and respect for each other, but it's nothing hard-hitting around will never. Reading it, for instance, about Marie Curie recently, I don't know, I'm not sure if was anyone in this group that recommended it to me, but obviously radiation therapy has helped many millions of people. But just as the sort of conversation we're having about AI now, she didn't foresee that it would be part of the, you know, the genesis of the nuclear bomb, etc. So I think you're right. It would be great to get a consensus, like a COP26 around what's responsible innovation, and it would be great to get that.
Really good points. Thank you for that. Krishnan, you've been really patient. So I'll give you the floor now. It's okay.
Thanks, Peter, and that's very insightful. And I think it's something that's probably very, very important. I teach innovation at one of the universities, and I was shocked that there were people at the university, 3 different professors having 3 different interpretations of what is innovation. The basic definition of what is innovation, forget about the methodologies, what they were teaching. And that's one of the big challenges that we seem to be having as a profession. Now, every consultant, whatever he was doing before, has rebranded it as innovation. The most funniest one is the design thinking. I can't seem to find the way to end that argument with the design thinking folks. Design thinking existed for a very different purpose, and today it's being called the innovation methodology that the world should adopt. Same thing, TRIZ was a problem-solving method. Today is being sold by big consulting companies as innovation method. So we are necessarily facing a crisis here, because before long we will have charlatans in the industry because they have read up a book on TRIZ coming back, and tomorrow there will be problem-solving whiz kids who have done problem solving and calling that innovation, and all sorts of nonsense happening. So how do you see the entire, while you said that if this has to become a collegial system, how do we actually make that happen? I can't see. I think that there will be lots of people who don't want that to happen.
Well, I suppose, sorry, you're really talking about the consulting fraternity. I think what you say is true, that there are lots of things that are triaged or dressed up as innovation. But never, that's also the case, though, that when you do consulting, when you go into organizations, there are lots of problems that they self-identify as innovation problems, and therefore the solutions have to be pretty flexible too. Trays I was never a fan of, but I do have a soft spot for design thinking, as I do a lot of consulting in design thinking. But yeah, this one of the issues is it's a slippery concept. And I bet all of us have gone into boardrooms and places where someone will tell you what they mean by innovation, and you're biting your tongue with horror at how they perceive it. So yeah, that's why I think the professionalization and the codification of processes and approaches, maybe beginning with the ISO, at least gives people a framework and a starting point to say, this is what it is. It's basically the generation of novel, useful ideas that are put into practice, or whatever the generic thing will be. Then we're all agreed. It's not, not some of the definitions that people would throw at you. But yeah, I mean, I suppose there's going to be a bit of gray area around, just as there is with anything like change management or any of the other stuff. And in the way, if we try and rigidify it too much, then it becomes like project management, and none of us is going to be interested in it anyway after that, and it'll be too straitjacketed. But I know what you mean. There's a road ahead.
It's interesting though, isn't it? I mean, people say project management, everybody knows what they mean because it's self-explanatory. You don't need to elaborate. But you talk about innovation. It's people roll their eyes, going, "No, we don't need to be doing bean bags and brightly coloured walls. We don't need to be inventing anything." And it's all of those things, none of those things. But Charlie, it's a dirty word.
Sorry, I was at a little talk about the Six Nations final against England, and Jerry Thornley said something that I hadn't thought of before. He basically said, these games that we're watching, they're pretty much the only thing we watch or read for which the ending hasn't yet been written. And I think innovation is that the ending hasn't been written when we embark on something, whereas in project management, even the date is written. So. Right, yeah. There has to be some looseness around it, but the ending isn't written for these projects.
Okay. Oh, interesting point. Thank you. Catherine, you came and went and came back again. You had a question?
Yeah. Sorry, my technology died on me. Hi, Peter, and thank you very much for today. That's really interesting, and the paper is really good. I read it and I kind of thought there's a danger in the professionalization of it is the outsourcing of the cultural part of innovation. It's a bit like, oh, well, we'll pay your man or your one, a high amount of money, and that'll be grand. We've innovation sorted now, tick. A bit like sustainability, put somebody in who has 40 million pieces of paper in environmental science, and that's us done. What do you think the professionalism and the professionalization of the function can do to not have that happen?
Yeah. Hi, Catherine, and thanks to you and many on this call for making the pilgrimage out to DCU to talk to students. So thank you very much for that. Within the paper, we interviewed a few people, and the concern that you express. So one of the interviews was a major global beverage manufacturer, and they basically said, we're not having any of this professionalization because we have it in IT, we have it in regulatory, we have it in sustainability, and all of them think they're sort of too cool for school, and they make a big deal out of everything. So we don't want another ivory tower of stuff like that. So they were essentially, but they're I'm not sure though that their approach was, they were basically saying we're going to rotate people in who are in the business already, and people are going to grow through experience and stuff like that, and they're going to move sideways into innovation. But it didn't feel to me like then therefore you really wouldn't have people who have a professional skill at identifying business model opportunities or radical opportunity. Essentially will have, you know, possibly people who are very, it's a bit like in the university where they take academics and promote them up to department managers, and it's a disaster because they just don't have, they have a different set of skills. So how do they avoid it? That's your question, is how do they avoid it become, and yeah, I'd have to think about that, because I do know, and I'm sure loads of you do, when you go into work with organizations, and maybe Alan had primary experience of this, but I definitely went in and worked with places like KBC, where they had an innovation, beautiful center in Sandwith Street, and they had all the cool workstations and all that sort of stuff. And then they realized that everyone else in the organization hated them. And Ron might have had that in Ulster Bank, that the minute they got into they needed someone in regulatory or legal, they were going to hit them with a crowbar like Jack Nicholson in The Shining. They were definitely, they were waiting in the long grass for them. And so that's a very good question, how not to isolate it from the rest of the business. That's maybe another paper in that, Catherine.
But from the business to purposely isolate themselves from the responsibility of innovation as well. It's a bit like, you know, the lawyers keep us legal, you know, the regulatory people keep us, you know, out of the realms of the court. But equally, we can say, a bit like an organization being sustainable, oh, well, we have a full sustainability function. But that's not living the dream.
No.
That's one of the points that I was actually going to pick up on, because it's these barriers to entry. I mean, I get the need to be credibility, because you need to get innovation needs a seat in the boardroom and needs to be taken seriously, the same as every other discipline is. So we need something there. And I would be saying, and I do still believe, we need to move towards professionalization. But one of the things that your paper seems to suggest is that what professionalization does is put barriers to entry up. You know, so you need to overcome those barriers before you're allowed to play. And that kind of grates with me a little bit, because a lot of what we're trying to do with Innovate Island and through the ISO work and various other initiatives is try and demystify innovation and make it more accessible for people. So removing the sort of cloaks and the magic incantations that the innovation consultants might use, you know, and trying to make it accessible for everybody. And the flip side of that is we'll make it professional, and then you're not allowed to do it because you're not qualified. So I don't know, it's not as simple as that, but that's kind of do we need steps? Or I suppose my question, do we really need steps and barriers to entry at this stage in innovation's maturity?
Well, I think you've touched on a really interesting tension or paradox. So if we want to be well paid and regarded as professionals, then we need to have some proxies that make us stand out from the last, from somebody who has no experience or no ways of sense making in organizations, and no models and no frameworks and no ways of sort of stopping things and understanding what's important. And so otherwise then we might as well take all the school leavers in and go down to minimum wage. So at some level there's a paradox there, a tension there. If there are no barriers to entry, there's no income, or there's no status, there's no profession. If there are barriers to entry, there's a risk that naturally talented people are not eligible to get in. And all I did in the paper was sort of flag that there could be some genius who is excluded, and that's a definite risk. Somebody who's really gifted and not academically strong, who might miss out on the opportunity to get in. That is definitely a risk. But I think in order to protect the profession, there has to be some exclusion criteria.
Okay, and that's maybe where things like the RISE model comes in, where it's the gold standard for professionals, and then the competency framework stuff that we're doing, which is the steps to get there. So you can still learn and develop skills along the way, but you need to reach a particular level in order to count as a professional. Sorry, Frank, I cut across you there. You were going to say something.
Peter, don't ever use that phrase again, minimum wage. Okay, right?
Yeah.
Never.
Okay.
But no, jokes aside, I think that's exactly as you said it, Peter. If we think about, rather than thinking about ourselves, if we think about our customers, how do they define if they're getting a good innovation advisor or hiring an innovation leader to work within their company? That's the job we're doing. So we're creating value for the person who's paying, who owns the purse, as well as for ourselves. That's it.
Okay, good stuff. Owen, I know you've had your hand up, but Emerson, you've got your hand up as well. We've about 5 minutes. So if you have a quick question, Emerson?
Hi, good. I have a bit of a comment in terms of, I agree that there must be some sort of standards going on, because I'm in the Caribbean country of Trinidad. And what I'm seeing is that people are seeing that there's a growing interest and demand for it. And yet they are trying to position themselves. So there's an HR manager who's trying to position herself as the innovation person. Sorry about that. As an innovation person. And we need to manage those. So someone used the word charlatans before, and having some sort of barrier to entry definitely will protect the profession, as well as let the employers know, well, to really get a quality person, they should be part of, like, I form the Innovation Association. So I agree with the professionalism aspect and having some sort of barrier.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Like Emerson is on his way over to the party in Ron's place.
Owen, did you want to jump in very quickly?
Yeah, one point, and it is a question. So, Peter, I did not hear from you yet an argument for moving from corporate to collegiate profession. That's not the way you framed the discussion. And there are differences between the two types of profession. Your slide doesn't show the why some are collegiate professions, why some are corporate professions. But one, do you see a strong argument for it? And two, do you have any comment on the why some are collegiate and why some are corporate professions?
The why, I think, is definitely historical. You know, it goes back a couple of centuries from the clergy and the medical profession, and it's artificial protectionism. Is there an advantage? I mean, and then sort of one of the dimensions of it is a specialist type organization, the partnership and all that kind of stuff, dedicated to the pursuit of that particular thing, and owned and controlled by partners. I'm interested. You know, when I was working in GSK, we were using IDEO, we were using loads of agencies, and the word charlatan came up. There were loads of, not that IDEO were, but loads of people were coming in the black polar necks and the thick rimmed glasses, something that I've tried to do myself many times subsequently, saying there's only one true way of innovation. It's this way. You know, this is the third secret of Fatima. We're willing to reveal it to you at a high price, and etc. Now, when those innovation agencies come to, they seem to all been picked off. Fjord, What If, they've been bought by the big agencies because they want to be part of that conversation about change and innovation. I don't see any reason why we shouldn't just stay as a corporate profession like HR and marketing. I can't see a good reason why we would move for another form of credentialism like that.
Okay, this is recorded, right, Charlie? And we're going to broadcast this. Peter has spoken. Thanks for that, Peter.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure both my followers will be indignant. But
and Alan has just suggested that we start all these Friday calls with some kind of professional pledge and swearing of allegiance to something or other. Yeah. If I can decide what that is, which... yeah, we'll see. We'll see where we go with that. So I'm very conscious of time. We're at 2 minutes to 2, so we're just about on time. So hopefully everybody's had a chance to contribute, ask questions where they wanted to. Really, just for me, Peter, thank you so much for taking the time to do that. I know you're involved in this group anyway, but it's always good to have inside voice on the research side that supports what most of us are doing on a day-to-day basis. Just so everyone knows, next week we've got a coffee stop. The week after, Owen, we've got Stephen O'Driscoll sharing some of his experiences about running innovation challenges. Is that right? Got that right? Absolutely.
Yeah.
And soon after that, I haven't got a date yet, but I really need to share what we're doing with the innovation competency stuff, because I really need your input on that. But it's not fair to ask for your input unless I tell you what I'm doing. So we'll get that scheduled in a couple of weeks' time as well. So,
well, thanks for the opportunity, guys. I mean, this is I think you're doing a wonderful job keeping this community going and giving it energy. And I was thrilled to be have the opportunity to share this stuff with you, because this is an audience that really cares about this. So thank you for the opportunity.
Great.
excellent.
Thanks,
Thank
Peter.
you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks again.
Cheers, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Have a good weekend, everyone. Cheers. Bye bye.